Sweet little girl recognizes the garden where she used to play before being given away by her own mother in exchange for money. Don't miss a second of this story that will surprise you with its ending, and join us on this journey. Now, tell me in the comments where you're watching this story from. Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to watch more stories like this and leave your like. Now let's get to the story. Years had passed since Seraphine, a quiet and resilient young woman, started selling flowers on Chestnut Street, one of Philadelphia's busiest avenues. Every morning, rain or shine, she set up her modest little stand, arranging each bouquet with care, small bursts of color meant to soften the days of hurried strangers. Life hadn't been easy, but she carried a calm strength in her eyes and a natural beauty that seemed untouched by the chaos around her. Her hands, weathered by work, still moved with the tenderness of someone who hadn't yet given up on the idea of kindness in the world. Most people passed her by without a glance, but not Silas. He was different, a successful businessman known in the area for his elegance and discipline. Every morning he'd walk past her stand. Unlike the others, he always greeted her with a soft, respectful smile. Occasionally, he would buy a small bouquet and mention that he kept it in his office as a reminder that there was still beauty outside of boardrooms and glass towers. Seraphine watched his quiet gestures from a distance, unaware of just how deeply their lives would one day intersect. "Good morning, Seraphine," Silas said, approaching her stand on a crisp autumn day. His tailored suit and leather briefcase marked him as someone from a world entirely different from hers. "Good morning, Mr. Montgomery," she replied with a polite smile. "The tulips just arrived this morning." "They look more vibrant than usual," he commented, studying the flowers with genuine interest. "It's the season. They bloom better when the air begins to cool." Silas nodded, appreciating her knowledge. "I'll take the tulips today then." As she prepared the bouquet, wrapped in craft paper and tied with simple twine, Silas observed her hands working. There was something about this young florist that intrigued him, a quiet strength, a silent dignity that few noticed. It was as if she didn't belong in this urban, bustling setting, but somewhere else, more delicate and serene. "Thank you," he said, handing her the exact amount. "They'll stay in my office, a reminder that beauty exists beyond walls of glass and concrete." Seraphine smiled again. It was a comment he had made before, but she appreciated the sincerity that always accompanied his words. "Have a good day, Mr. Montgomery." "You too, Seraphine." She watched him walk away, blending into the crowd of executives and workers filling the avenue at that hour. There was something comforting about the consistency of these brief morning encounters, a small anchor in her life of uncertainties. The rest of the morning passed in the familiar cadence of occasional customers, distracted glances, and the constant noise of traffic. Seraphine sold her flowers, exchanged a few kind words with the few regular customers, and let her mind wander between fragmented memories and dreams not yet realized. It was close to noon, when the sun was high and the movement began to decrease, that something changed in the rhythm of the avenue. First there was a muffled scream, then the sound of hurried steps. Seraphine looked up from her account book and saw a scene that seemed surreal in the everyday setting of Chestnut Street. Across the street, two men dressed in black were dragging someone toward a dark van parked in a no-parking zone. The man being dragged was struggling, but his movement seemed weakened. When he turned his face toward her, Seraphine felt her heart skip a beat. It was Silas Montgomery. Without thinking twice, driven by an instinct she didn't even understand, Seraphine grabbed the bucket of water where she kept some fresh flowers. She ran across the street, ignoring the annoyed honk of a taxi, and approached the trio. With all the strength she could muster, she hurled the cold water directly in the face of the man who was holding Silas most firmly. The shock and surprise were instantaneous. The man let go of Silas, who stumbled backward, while the second attacker looked around, clearly alarmed by the attention the scene was beginning to attract. Within seconds, both men abandoned what they were doing and ran to the van, which quickly drove off, disappearing into heavy traffic. Trembling and breathless, Seraphine turned to Silas, who seemed equally shaken. His elegant suit was wrinkled, and there was a cut on his right eyebrow. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Thanks to you," he replied, still trying to catch his breath. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," she said, already beginning to feel the weight of her actions. "We should call the police." Silas straightened his tie with hands that were still trembling slightly. "Yes, let's do that. But first, let me buy all your flowers today. Your stand." Only then did Seraphine look back and see that, in her rush to help him, she had left her small business completely unprotected. Some bouquets were scattered on the sidewalk, trampled by passers-by who hadn't even noticed. "That's not necessary," she began to say, but Silas was already taking out his wallet. "Please, I insist. It's the least I can do." As they walked back to the stand to clean up the mess and wait for the police, Seraphine felt a strange sensation run down her spine, as if that moment, as chaotic as it was destined to happen. As if the universe was finally moving the pieces in a direction she couldn't see, but could feel. What she didn't know was that this incident on Chestnut Street would be just the first in a series of events that would forever change the course of her quiet, solitary life, reconnecting her with a past that had long been buried under layers of silence and forgetting. 3 days had passed since the incident on Chestnut Street. Seraphine had returned to her routine, albeit with some apprehension. Each dark van that passed made her heart momentarily accelerate. The police had recorded the occurrence, but without clear license plates or precise descriptions of the suspects, there was little to be done beyond general alerts. In her mind, she constantly relived those moments. The expression of panic in Silas's eyes, the adrenaline running through her veins, the sensation of having done something significant for the first time in a long time. It was as if a long-dormant muscle had suddenly been activated, a protective instinct she didn't even know she possessed. That Thursday afternoon, as she arranged the last bouquets before closing, Seraphine noticed an elegant black car parking near her stand. For an instant, she felt fear return, but she soon recognized the figure getting out of the vehicle. It was Silas Montgomery, this time without his work briefcase, wearing more casual clothes than usual, dark, well-cut pants, and a navy blue long-sleeved shirt. "Good afternoon, Seraphine," he said, approaching with a warm smile. The small cut on his eyebrow was now just a thin line, almost imperceptible. "Mr. Montgomery," she replied, surprised by his presence at that time of day. "Is everything okay? Has there been any news about what happened?" He shook his head. "Unfortunately not, but that's not why I'm here." He made a small pause, as if organizing his thoughts. "Actually, I came to invite you to have lunch at my house this Sunday." Seraphine blinked, uncertain if she had understood correctly. "Lunch? At your house?" "Yes," he confirmed. "My wife, Vera, insists on meeting the person who probably saved my life. It would be a small gathering, just the 3 of us." A way to properly thank you. The mention of his wife brought Seraphine a sense of relief she hadn't realized she needed. The invitation was genuinely a gesture of gratitude, nothing more. "I don't know if I should," she hesitated. She rarely attended social environments, and the idea of being in the home of someone like Silas Montgomery, certainly a mansion in some noble neighborhood, made her uncomfortable. "Please, consider it," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "It would mean a lot to us. Besides," he smiled slightly, "Vera is an excellent cook and would be deeply offended if you refused to try her famous Sunday roast." There was something in the way he talked about his wife, an authentic affection in his voice, a gleam in his eyes that touched Seraphine. It was the kind of connection she had always observed in others but never experienced personally. "All right," she finally agreed. It would be a pleasure." Silas's smile widened. "Excellent." He took from his pocket a small card with an address printed in golden ink. "We'll be expecting you at noon. I can send a car if you prefer." "That won't be necessary, thank you. I can take the bus." Silas nodded, respecting her answer, although he seemed slightly concerned with the idea of her using public transportation. "As you wish, but if you change your mind, my number is on the card. Just call me." After his departure, Seraphine stood looking at the small piece of paper in her hands. The address belonged to one of the oldest and most exclusive areas of Philadelphia, Chestnut Hill, a neighborhood she knew only by name, famous for its historic mansions and lush gardens. For a brief moment, she felt the impulse to give up. What would she, a simple street flower vendor, do in such a refined environment? What would she talk about with people whose lives were so distant from the reality she knew? But there was something stronger than social fear in her heart. An almost magnetic curiosity, an inexplicable sensation that she should accept this invitation. As if, in some mysterious way, her destiny was tied to this seemingly simple decision. That night, in her small apartment, Seraphine examined the only semi-formal dress she owned, a petrol blue model, modest and a bit old-fashioned, which she had bought at a second-hand store for a job interview years ago. She had never worn it, as she didn't get the position, and the dress ended up becoming a silent reminder of yet another closed door in her life. As she held it against her body in front of the mirror, Seraphine allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to dream of possibilities. Not of romance or wealth, but of genuine human connections, of the sensation of belonging that had always eluded her. "It's just a lunch," she said to her reflection, trying to control her expectations. "Just a gesture of gratitude." However, as she carefully folded the dress and placed it on the only chair in her bedroom, a small voice inside whispered that perhaps, just maybe, it was the beginning of something more significant, something that would change the course of her silent and solitary story. What Seraphine couldn't imagine was how correct this prediction was, and how the simple act of crossing the threshold of the Montgomery's house on the following Sunday would lead her to a confrontation with the past she had fought so hard to forget. Sunday dawned with a clear sky and a gentle breeze that carried the aroma of the last autumn flowers. Seraphine woke up even before her alarm clock rang, a mixture of anxiety and expectation pulsing in her chest. She had spent the previous night between fragmented dreams and sudden awakenings, her mind refusing to rest completely. After a long shower, she put on her best set of underwear, also bought for that same failed job interview, and slid the petrol blue dress over her slim body. The fabric, although simple, fell with surprising elegance, enhancing her delicate silhouette and the emerald tone of her eyes. With slightly trembling fingers, she loosened her hair from the usual bun, allowing the light brown waves to frame her face in a softer style than usual. "It's just a lunch," she repeated to herself, as she applied a little blush and a light pink lipstick, her only cosmetic luxury, saved for special occasions that rarely arose. At the last moment, she decided to bring a gift, not something hastily bought, but something that would have meaning. From her small collection of houseplants, she chose a white orchid she had personally cultivated, transferring it to a handcrafted ceramic pot she had bought at a fair the previous summer. It was simple, but genuine, like herself. The journey to Chestnut Hill was longer than she expected. 2 buses and a 15-minute walk through tree-lined streets where each residence seemed to tell its own story of privilege and tradition. Victorian and colonial mansions alternated with meticulously planned gardens, forming a setting that seemed straight out of a period film. When she finally arrived at the address indicated on the card, Seraphine stopped, momentarily breathless. Before her stood a grey stone mansion with vines elegantly climbing up its walls. Large glass windows reflected the sunlight, and a marble staircase led to the imposing entrance door. It was majestic without being ostentatious, classic without seeming antiquated. For an instant she considered turning back. This world was not hers. It never would be. But then she remembered Silas's sincere look, the way he had spoken of his wife, and found the courage to climb the steps and ring the doorbell. The door was opened almost immediately, not by a butler as she had imagined, but by Vera Montgomery herself. Tall and elegant, with blonde hair tied in an impeccable bun and eyes of an almost violet blue, she emanated an aura of natural sophistication that made Seraphine instantly feel inadequate. "You must be Seraphine," said Vera with a warm smile that immediately softened her impeccable posture. "Please, come in. We've been looking forward to your visit." Vera's voice had a melodious timbre with the slightest accent that Seraphine couldn't identify, perhaps French or Italian, suggesting distant European origins. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Montgomery," replied Seraphine, timidly extending the orchid. "I brought something for the house." Vera's eyes lit up at the sight of the plant. "Oh, it's absolutely lovely. And please, call me Vera. Mrs. Montgomery makes me feel like my mother-in-law." She laughed lightly, a crystalline sound that echoed through the spacious entrance hall. The interior of the house was as impressive as its exterior, with high ceilings, elaborate moldings, and a curved staircase that led to the second floor. However, despite the architectural grandeur, there was an undeniable sense of coziness in the environment. Family photographs decorated the walls, well-handled books filled the shelves, and the aroma of home-cooked food permeated the air. "Silas is in his office, finalizing a call," explained Vera as she guided Seraphine through the house. "He works too much, even on Sundays. But he promised to join us soon." They crossed a spacious living room and reached the kitchen, a surprisingly welcoming space with dark wood cabinets, a central island, and large windows that opened to a view of the side garden. "Wow!" Seraphine couldn't contain the exclamation. "Your kitchen is amazing!" Vera smiled, clearly pleased. "It's my domain. Silas may govern the business world, but here, I'm the one who dictates the rules." She winked conspiratorially. "Would you like a glass of wine while we finish lunch?" "I'd love to," replied Seraphine, beginning to relax in the welcoming presence of the hostess. While Vera busied herself with the final preparations for lunch, they conversed with an ease that surprised Seraphine. She discovered that Vera was a trained chef who had abandoned a promising career in high-end restaurants to dedicate herself to social projects, including a healthy eating program for public schools. "Food brings people together," explained Vera as she seasoned a salad. "It's a universal language. When we share a meal, we share a bit of our stories, our cultures, our souls." There was something deeply genuine in Vera's philosophy that touched Seraphine. Despite all the apparent differences in their lives, she felt an unexpected connection with this woman. It was at this moment that Silas entered the kitchen, wearing beige pants and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, looking more jovial and relaxed than Seraphine had ever seen him. "Seraphine! I'm glad you could come," he exclaimed, approaching to greet her. "I hope Vera hasn't been filling your head with embarrassing stories about me." "Not yet," replied Vera with a mischievous smile, "but the day is long." The three laughed, and Seraphine felt a wave of gratitude for the naturalness with which she was being treated, not as a stranger or a person of lower social class, but as a welcome guest, almost a friend. "Lunch is almost ready," announced Vera. "Silas, why don't you show the garden to Seraphine while I finalize the last details? The day is perfect for an outdoor stroll." "Excellent idea," he agreed, gesturing for Seraphine to follow him. "You like gardens, don't you? Considering your profession." "Yes," she replied with a sincere smile. "Flowers are my silent confidants." Silas led her through a side door that opened onto an elegant terrace overlooking the garden. And it was there, standing on the threshold, that Seraphine felt the world around her suddenly slow down. Before her stretched a magnificent garden. A stone path meandered among beds of wildflowers, leading to a small wooden gazebo covered with ivy. Further ahead, an ornamental lake glistened under the sunlight, with water lilies floating gracefully on its surface. But it wasn't the beauty of the place that made her heart almost stop. It was the recognition The impossible familiarity, the echo of a long-buried memory. Her hands began to tremble. Her face lost its color. "Seraphine!" Silas's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you okay?" She couldn't respond immediately. Her eyes scanned the garden with growing agitation, absorbing every detail, every curve of the path, every grouping of flowers. It wasn't possible. It simply wasn't possible. "This garden," she finally murmured, her voice almost inaudible. I know this garden." Silas frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Seraphine took a hesitant step off the terrace, as if testing the solidity of the ground beneath her feet, then another, and another, until she was walking along the stone path, her fingers brushing the petals of the flowers, her eyes registering every detail with a mixture of disbelief and painful recognition. "I played here," she said, more to herself than to Silas, who followed her in silence, clearly concerned. "I ran along this path. I hid behind those trees. When she reached the small lake, Seraphine fell to her knees, her fingers touching the cool water, as if to confirm its reality. A solitary tear rolled down her face, followed by another and another, until she was crying silently, her body trembling with emotions she couldn't name. "This isn't just any garden," she finally said, looking at Silas with tearful eyes. "This is my garden. This was my home." The lunch that should have been a celebration of gratitude transformed into something entirely different. Seated in the Montgomerys' elegant dining room, with a plate of practically untouched roast in front of her, Seraphine tried to organize the thoughts that whirled in her mind. Silas and Vera observed her with a mixture of concern and fascination, patiently waiting for her to find the words. "I'm not sure where to begin," Seraphine finally said, her fingers nervously playing with the linen napkin in her lap. "It's all so surreal." "Start from the beginning," suggested Vera gently, covering Seraphine's trembling hand with her own. "Take your time." Taking a deep breath, Seraphine nodded. "This house, I lived here as a child, not as a visitor or guest, but as a resident. This was my home until I was 6 years old." The shock was visible on the faces of the Montgomery couple. They had bought the property about 10 years ago, after the previous owner, an elderly widow, had passed away. The house had undergone extensive renovations, but the garden, with its classic design and century-old trees, had been preserved almost intact. "My parents were Harlan and Maris Whitmore," continued Seraphine. "My father was a university professor, a specialist in English literature. My mother was an artist. She painted watercolors and gave private art lessons. We lived a comfortable life, not luxurious like yours, but happy." She paused, her eyes straying to the window where she could see a fragment of the garden that had meant so much in her childhood. "Then, when I was 6, my father suddenly fell ill. I don't remember the medical details, I was too young to understand, but I know it was quick and devastating. In a matter of months, he was gone." Silas murmured words of condolence, but Seraphine continued, as if fearing that if she stopped, she would never be able to resume the narrative. "After that, everything changed. We discovered that my father had debts we didn't know about. The house was mortgaged. There were unpaid loans. My mother, destroyed by grief and financial pressure, began to crumble. I saw her crying every night, talking to herself, drinking wine until she fell asleep on the couch. The memories now came in a cascade, as if a long-closed dam had finally given way. One day, she dressed me in my best dress, a blue one with white lace. She combed my hair, put my favorite dolls in a small backpack. She said we were going to make a special visit." Seraphine's voice faltered slightly. "She took me to a building downtown. There was an office with light-colored walls and toys scattered in a corner. A woman in a business suit greeted us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My mother talked to her for a long time, signing papers, while I played distractedly." Vera covered her mouth with her hand, already anticipating the unfolding of the story. Silas remained silent, his face tense. "When I realized my mother was saying goodbye, She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. She was crying so hard that her whole body trembled. She said she loved me more than anything in the world, that one day I would understand. And then she left. A tear rolled down Seraphine's face, but her voice remained firm. The woman in the suit explained that I would be living with a new family, that my mother could no longer take care of me, that it was for my own good. A private adoption, murmured Silas, understanding. Seraphine nodded. Years later, when I was already a teenager, I discovered more details. My mother received money. I don't know exactly how much, but enough to pay off part of the debts and start over somewhere else. She gave me away in exchange for money. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with unverbalized emotions. Vera had tears in her eyes, and Silas seemed deeply shaken. "Where did you go after that?" asked Vera finally. "I was adopted by a family in Pittsburgh. The Jensens, decent people who did the best they could for me, but I never felt truly part of them. At 18, I left home, tried college for a while, but couldn't maintain myself. Since then, I've been living on my own, doing what I can to survive." She looked directly at the Montgomerys, a sudden resolution in her eyes. "I never returned to this house until today. I didn't even pass by the street in all these years. It was too painful." "Seraphine," said Silas, leaning forward, "I have no words to express how sorry I am for everything you went through, and what an extraordinary coincidence that our paths have crossed in this way." Vera, however, had a thoughtful look. "Perhaps it's not just coincidence," she said softly. "Some things in life seem too perfectly arranged to be mere chance." Seraphine wiped a tear with the back of her hand. "I don't know what to think anymore. Being here again, in this place that was once my home, it's overwhelming. I feel like that little girl again, watching her whole world fall apart." "You don't have to go through this alone," said Vera firmly. "Not anymore." "What do you mean?" Silas and Vera exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. Then Silas spoke. "We want to help you, Seraphine, not out of pity, but because your story touches us deeply. This house was your home before it was ours. In a way, we're connected through this place." Vera nodded in agreement. "We'd like to help you find answers about your parents, about what happened after you left. Maybe even about your mother, if that's something you want." Seraphine felt a rush of emotions: gratitude, fear, hope. "I don't know if I'm ready to face all that." "You don't have to decide now," said Silas gently, "but know that the offer stands. And in the meantime, please consider this house as a place you can return to, not as a guest, but as someone who belongs here." As the conversation continued into the afternoon, Seraphine felt something shifting inside her, a wall beginning to crumble, a wound starting to heal. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to remember not just the pain of losing her home, but the joy she had once felt within these walls. The garden where she had played, the lake where she had watched frogs and dragonflies, the gazebo where her father had read stories to her, and in those memories she glimpsed something she thought had been lost forever, a sense of belonging, of roots, of home. What she didn't know yet was that this unexpected reunion with her past was just the beginning. That beneath the polished surface of the Montgomery household and the serene beauty of the Whitmore garden lay secrets that would reshape her understanding not just of her past, but of herself. A week after the emotional Sunday lunch, Seraphine found herself back at the Montgomery mansion. This time, she arrived with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The initial shock of recognizing her childhood home had mellowed into a quiet determination to understand what had happened all those years ago. Vera welcomed her warmly, leading her to a cozy study filled with books and comfortable leather chairs. Silas was already there, a folder of papers spread before him on an antique desk. "I hope you don't mind," he said, rising to greet her. "We've been doing some research about the house's history and your family." "I appreciate it," Seraphine replied, taking a seat across from him. To be honest, I've never had the courage to look into my past too deeply. It always felt safer to just move forward. Vera sat beside her, offering a cup of tea. Sometimes looking back is the only way to truly move forward. We heal by understanding, not by forgetting. Silas nodded in agreement. We've discovered some interesting things. The house was indeed sold after your father's death, but not immediately. It appears your mother held on to it for almost a year before finally selling it to a couple named the Devereux. The Devereux? Seraphine frowned. The name doesn't sound familiar. They only owned the property for a short time, continued Silas, less than 2 years. They sold it to an elderly woman, Margaret Holloway, who lived here until her death about 10 years ago. That's when we purchased it. Seraphine took a sip of her tea, trying to process this timeline. So my mother didn't lose the house right away, but that doesn't make sense. We were in financial trouble after my father died. The adoption agency, she said she couldn't keep me because we were going to lose everything. Vera and Silas exchanged a meaningful look. That's what we found puzzling as well, said Vera gently. According to the property records, the house wasn't in foreclosure when you were adopted. In fact, it wasn't even mortgaged at that point. Seraphine felt her heart beating faster. What are you saying? Silas leaned forward. We're saying that the story about your mother having to give you up for financial reasons might not be entirely accurate. At least the documents don't support that narrative. A wave of emotions washed over Seraphine, confusion, anger, a deep sense of betrayal. If it wasn't financial necessity, then why had her mother given her away? What possible reason could justify such an action? There's something else, said Vera hesitantly. During the renovation of the East Wing last year, the contractors found something hidden in one of the walls, a small compartment behind a loose panel. We didn't think much of it at the time. Old houses often have their secrets, but after hearing your story... She stood and walked to a cabinet, retrieving a small wooden box. We think this might have belonged to your parents. With trembling hands, Seraphine accepted the box. It was made of dark walnut, with intricate carvings along the edges. A small brass lock secured the lid, but the key was missing. May I? Asked Silas, holding up a small tool set. When she nodded, he carefully worked on the lock until it clicked open. Inside the box lay several items: a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, a small velvet pouch, an old-fashioned fountain pen, and a leather-bound journal with the initials H.W. embossed on the cover. Harlan Whitmore, whispered Seraphine, tracing the initials with her finger. My father's journal. The three sat in silence as Seraphine gently removed the journal from the box. The leather was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and slightly brittle. With reverent care, she opened it to the first page. September 12th, 1992, she read aloud. Today, my beautiful daughter came into the world. Seraphine Elizabeth Whitmore. Named after Maris's grandmother, she has her mother's eyes and, I suspect, my stubborn nature. I have never known love like this. Immediate, overwhelming, terrifying in its intensity. I will protect this child with everything I am. Tears welled in Seraphine's eyes. She had few memories of her father, just fragments of a tall man with kind eyes and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder when he laughed. To hear his thoughts, to read his words written in his own hand, was like having a piece of him returned to her. She flipped through more pages, glimpsing snapshots of her early childhood through her father's eyes, her first steps, her fascination with the garden, her habit of talking to flowers as if they could understand her. Then she reached an entry dated just a few months before his death. I've received the diagnosis today. Terminal, they say. 6 months at most. How do I tell Maris? How do I tell my little Seraphine that I won't see her grow up? The thought of leaving them is unbearable. I need to make arrangements, ensure they're taken care of. The life insurance should cover the mortgage at least. And there's the trust fund for Seraphine's education. I've spoken to Thomas about updating my will. Everything must go to them. Everything. Seraphine closed the journal, unable to continue reading. The pain was too raw, too immediate. It was as if her father were in the room with them, his voice clear in her mind. "There's more," said Silas softly. "In the bundle of letters. They appear to be correspondence between your parents, and this..." He carefully opened the velvet pouch, revealing a delicate gold locket, was inside as well. Seraphine gasped as she recognized the locket. "My mother wore this every day. It was a gift from my father on their wedding day." She opened it with shaking fingers to reveal a tiny photograph. Her parents on their wedding day, young and radiant with happiness. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at Silas and Vera. "If my father made arrangements, if the house wasn't in financial trouble, why did my mother give me up? What really happened after he died?" Vera reached out to squeeze her hand. "We don't have all the answers yet, Seraphine, but we want to help you find them. These letters, your father's journal, they might contain clues." Silas nodded in agreement. "And there's someone else who might be able to help. The lawyer your father mentioned, Thomas. If he handled your father's will, he might know what actually happened." Seraphine felt a mixture of fear and determination rising within her. For most of her life, she had accepted the narrative that her mother had abandoned her out of financial necessity. It was painful, but at least it made a kind of logical sense. Now that foundation was crumbling, leaving her with more questions than answers. "I need to know the truth," she said finally, her voice steadied despite the emotions coursing through her. "Even if it hurts, even if it changes everything I thought I knew about my past. I need to understand why my mother really gave me away." As the afternoon light filtered through the study windows, casting long shadows across the room, Seraphine made a silent promise to herself. She would uncover the truth about her past, no matter where it led. She would reclaim the narrative of her own life, piece by scattered piece. What she didn't realize was how deeply intertwined her story was with the very house they sat in, and how the garden she had once played in held secrets that had been waiting decades to be revealed. The law offices of Hamilton and Prescott occupied the 15th floor of a sleek downtown building. Despite the modern exterior, the firm's reception area maintained an old-world charm, with dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books lining the walls, and a hushed atmosphere of dignified professionalism. Seraphine sat rigidly on the edge of a leather armchair, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her purse. Beside her, Silas projected his usual calm confidence, occasionally offering reassuring glances in her direction. It had taken 2 weeks to secure this appointment with Thomas Hamilton, now the senior partner of the firm, and according to her father's journal, the man who had handled Harlan Whitmore's will. "Ms. Whitmore?" A crisp voice broke through her thoughts. An elegant woman in a tailored suit stood at the reception desk. "Mr. Hamilton will see you now." Seraphine rose on unsteady legs. "Would you like me to come with you?" Silas asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. "Please, I'm not sure I can do this alone." They followed the woman down a corridor lined with framed diplomas and awards until they reached a corner office with a breathtaking view of the Philadelphia skyline. Behind an imposing mahogany desk sat Thomas Hamilton, a man in his late 60s with a shock of white hair and penetrating gray eyes that assessed them sharply from behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, rising to greet them. His voice was deep and measured, the voice of a man accustomed to choosing his words with care. "I must say, your call came as quite a surprise. I haven't heard the name Whitmore in, well, it must be nearly 20 years now." "Thank you for seeing us, Mr. Hamilton," she replied, taking the seat he indicated. "This is Silas Montgomery, a friend who has been helping me piece together my past." Hamilton nodded politely towards Silas, then fixed his attention on Seraphine. "I understand you're here about your father's will. Before we begin, I'll need to verify your identity. I hope you understand. Confidentiality is the cornerstone of our profession." After Seraphine provided her identification and answered several questions about her parents that only their daughter would know, Hamilton's formal demeanor softened slightly. "You look remarkably like your mother," he observed. "Though you have Harlan's eyes, he was a good man, your father. One of the most honorable clients I've ever had the privilege to work with." "That's partly why I'm here," said Seraphine, gathering her courage. "I've recently discovered some inconsistencies in what I was told about what happened after his death. I was hoping you might be able to clarify some things about his will and the financial situation my mother faced." Hamilton leaned back in his chair, his expression guarded. "I'm somewhat limited in what I can discuss, even after all these years. But as you are the primary beneficiary, I can share the general contents of the will with you." He pressed a button on his desk intercom. "Patricia, could you pull the Whitmore file from archives, please? The complete file." While they waited, Hamilton asked Seraphine about her life since leaving Philadelphia. She gave him the abbreviated version, noticing how his expression grew troubled as she mentioned her adoption and subsequent years. "That's not what should have happened," he murmured, almost to himself. Before she could ask what he meant, his assistant arrived with a thick folder. Hamilton thanked her, then spread the documents on his desk, scanning them with practiced efficiency. "Here we are," he said finally, selecting several papers. "Harlan Whitmore's last will and testament, executed 3 months before his death. As I recalled, the provisions were quite straightforward. The house at 427 Chestnut Hill Avenue was to be held in trust for you until your 25th birthday. Your mother was granted lifetime residency rights, but ownership would transfer to you upon reaching the specified age." Seraphine felt the blood drain from her face. "The house was mine? But my mother sold it." Hamilton frowned. "According to these documents, she shouldn't have been able to. The trust was explicit." He flipped through more pages. "There was also a life insurance policy, quite substantial. The benefits were divided, half to your mother for immediate living expenses, half to a trust for your education and future needs." "So there was money," Seraphine whispered, her voice tight with emotion. "She wasn't destitute. She didn't have to give me up." Hamilton removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Ms. Whitmore, Seraphine, I feel I should be frank with you. I was deeply concerned when your mother stopped responding to communications from this office. When the house was sold, I attempted to intervene, but she had somehow circumvented the trust provisions. By the time I discovered what had happened, both you and she had disappeared. I hired a private investigator, but the trail went cold. Eventually, I had to accept that I had failed in my duty to protect your interests." Silas leaned forward. "Mr. Hamilton, are you saying that what happened was illegal?" "Not just potentially illegal. It was directly counter to Harlan's explicit wishes." Hamilton pulled another document from the folder. "This is a letter your father wrote to be given to you on your 18th birthday. It was returned to this office marked addressee unknown. I've kept it all these years, hoping someday I might be able to fulfill my promise to him." With trembling hands, Seraphine accepted the sealed envelope. Her name was written on the front, in a strong, flowing script that tugged at the edges of her earliest memories. "My father wrote this for me. He knew he was dying," said Hamilton softly. "He wanted to make sure you understood how much he loved you and to ensure you would be taken care of. He made me promise, personally, that I would see his wishes carried out." "But something went wrong," said Silas. Hamilton nodded grimly. "Very wrong. And I'm afraid your mother was not the only party involved. There were others who helped her circumvent the legal protections Harlan had put in place, professionals who should have known better." "Do you know why she did it?" asked Seraphine, her voice barely audible. "Why she would give me up when there was no financial need to do so?" The elderly lawyer shook his head. "I can only speculate. Your mother was deeply affected by Harlan's death. Grief can make people do inexplicable things." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. A few years after you disappeared, I received a letter from your mother. She didn't provide an address, just instructions to keep it with your father's will. She wrote that someday you might come looking for answers, and when you did, I was to give you this." From the bottom of the folder, he withdrew another envelope, this one showing signs of age and handling. Seraphine took it wordlessly, adding it to her father's letter. "I don't know if I can read these right now," she admitted. "You don't have to," said Silas gently. "Take them home. Read them when you're ready." Hamilton nodded in agreement. "However, there is one more matter we should discuss today." He pulled a final document from the folder. "The trust established for you. While the house is no longer part of its assets, the educational fund remains intact. With interest accrued over these years, it represents a significant sum. As the trustee, I have the authority to release these funds to you immediately, as you are well past the age condition." Seraphine stared at him in disbelief. "There's money? For me?" "Your father was determined that you would have opportunities, regardless of what happened to him. He may not have been able to see you grow up, but he found a way to care for you even in his absence." Hamilton slid a document across the desk. "This is the current balance of the trust. It's rightfully yours." Seraphine looked down at the figure and gasped. It was more money than she had ever imagined possessing, enough to change her life completely. "I don't know what to say," she managed finally. "You don't need to say anything," replied Hamilton. "Just know that your father loved you very much, and he did everything in his power to protect you. The system failed you both, but perhaps it's not too late to honor his intentions." As they left the law office, Seraphine clutched the envelopes and trust documents to her chest, feeling as though she were carrying pieces of her shattered past, fragments that might, with care, begin to form a new picture of who she was and where she came from. "Are you all right?" Silas asked as they rode the elevator down to the lobby. Seraphine looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. "But for the first time, I think I might be ready to find out." Neither of them could have predicted how the contents of those letters would reshape everything Seraphine thought she knew about her mother's decision, or how they would lead her back to the garden that had been waiting all these years for her return. Back at the Montgomery home, Seraphine sat alone in the garden, the two sealed envelopes resting in her lap. The afternoon sun cast dappled shadows through the trees, creating patterns that danced across the aged paper. She had asked for privacy, and Silas and Vera had respectfully withdrawn to the house, leaving her to face the words of her parents in solitude. For nearly an hour, she simply sat there, watching the play of light on water, gathering courage. To read these letters was to open a door to the past that had been closed for so long, a door that might reveal truths she wasn't prepared to face. Finally, with a deep breath, she picked up her father's letter first. The seal broke with a soft crack, releasing the faint scent of old paper and something else, a hint of pipe tobacco that instantly transported her to foggy memories of sitting on a man's lap while he read to her, the same comforting aroma surrounding them both. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the pages and began to read. "My dearest Seraphine, if you are reading this, then you have reached your 18th birthday, and I have been gone from your life for 12 long years. How I wish I could see the young woman you have become. In my mind, I picture you with your mother's grace and my stubborn determination, perhaps with that same serious expression you would get as a child when concentrating on building a tower of blocks. By now, you know that I died when you were very young. What you may not know is how desperately I fought to stay with you and your mother, how each treatment, each hospital stay was endured not with any real hope of recovery, but simply to have a few more precious days to watch you grow. I write this letter in the garden, your favorite place. You are napping inside, and your mother is painting in her studio. From where I sit, I can see the gazebo where we read stories, and the pond where you insist the frogs are actually enchanted princes waiting for a princess brave enough to kiss them. This garden has been your kingdom, your sanctuary, your place of wonder. My greatest regret is that I will not see you continue to bloom here, like the flowers you so adore. Seraphine, I have made every arrangement I can to ensure that you and your mother will be secure after I'm gone. The house is yours. It will pass to you when you turn 25, though your mother will have the right to live there with you, of course. There is money set aside for your education, for your future. Thomas Hamilton, my dear friend and attorney, has instructions for everything. But a father's duty goes beyond financial provisions. If I could give you one gift to carry through life, it would be this. Know that you are deeply, completely loved. Not just by me, but by your mother as well. Maris loves you with an intensity that sometimes frightens her. She feels things so deeply, my beautiful, complicated wife. I worry about her, about how she will cope with my loss. She puts on a brave face for my sake, but I know her heart is breaking. Please be patient with her in the years after I'm gone. Grief can make even the strongest among us do strange things, make choices we might later regret. Whatever happens, never doubt that she loves you, just as I do, limitlessly and eternally. My beautiful daughter, I wish for you a life filled with the same joy you have brought to mine. Be brave, be kind, and remember that whenever you stand in a garden, wherever it may be, I'm somehow there with you, watching over the flowers of your life as they bloom. All my love, now and always, your father. Harlan. Tears streamed down Seraphine's face as she finished reading, dropping onto the paper and blurring the ink in places. She pressed the letter to her heart, feeling a connection to her father that had been missing for most of her life. His words were a gift, a bridge across time, allowing her to feel his love as if he were sitting beside her on the garden bench. After several minutes of quiet weeping, she carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. Then, steeling herself, she picked up her mother's letter. This one was harder to open, heavy with the weight of abandonment and unanswered questions. The handwriting inside was different, more hurried, less certain, with words occasionally crossed out and rewritten. Seraphine, I don't know if you will ever read these words. I don't know if you would want to, or if you could ever forgive me enough to try. But I must write them anyway, in the hope that someday you might seek answers, might want to understand why your mother gave you away. There is no gentle way to begin, no perfect explanation that will erase the hurt I've caused you, so I will simply tell you the truth, as painful as it is to admit. After your father died, I fell apart. The grief was overwhelming, all-consuming. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, could barely function. The house that had once been our happy home became a mausoleum of memories, each room a reminder of what we had lost. And you, my beautiful, innocent child, you looked so much like him. Your eyes, your smile, even the way you would furrow your brow when thinking hard about something. Seeing you was like seeing a ghost of Harlan, a daily reminder that he was gone forever, while some small part of him lived on in you. I began drinking to numb the pain. At first, just in the evenings after you were asleep, then earlier and earlier in the day. I was not the mother you deserved during those months. I was barely present, even when physically in the same room. The drinking led to poor decisions, to a desperate attempt to escape the suffocating grief. Then came that terrible night. I had been drinking heavily and fell asleep with candles still burning in my studio. You were the one who woke me, choking on smoke, terrified. If you had not come into my room when you did, the fire might have spread beyond the studio. You saved us both, my 6-year-old daughter forced to be the responsible one because her mother was not. That was the moment I realized I was a danger to you, not intentionally, never that, but through neglect, through my inability to be the parent you needed. I convinced myself that you would be better off with a stable family, with parents who could care for you properly, who weren't drowning in grief and alcohol. I told myself it was a temporary arrangement, that I would get help, get sober, and then reclaim you. I believed my own lies because the alternative, admitting I was abandoning my child, was too painful to face. The agency promised you would go to a good family, people who had been carefully vetted. They said I could have updates, could perhaps even arrange visits once I was stable. More lies, as it turned out, but I desperately wanted to believe them. The money, yes, there was money, as I'm sure you've discovered by now if you're reading this. I used it to ensure you would go to a premium placement, a family with resources and connections. The rest I took and ran, unable to face the reality of what I had done. I couldn't bear to live in our house without either Harlan or you, so I found ways to sell it despite the trust provisions. More shameful actions I cannot justify. For years, I tried to find you. When I finally got sober, when I finally faced the horrible truth of what I had done, I hired private investigators, but the adoption records were sealed, the agency uncooperative. It was as if you had vanished, and I had no legal right to find you. I have lived with this guilt every day since. There is not a morning I wake without thinking of you, not a birthday that passes without my wondering how you are celebrating, if you are happy, if you are loved as you deserve to be. I do not ask for forgiveness. I have no right. But I do ask that you know this. Giving you away was never about not loving you enough. It was about loving you too much to subject you to the broken person I had become. It was the wrong choice, made for what I believed were the right reasons, clouded by grief and addiction and desperation. If you are reading this, if you have somehow found your way back to where our story began, know that I have never stopped loving you. Know that the garden you so loved has bloomed in my heart every day we've been apart. A constant reminder of the joy you brought into our lives and the terrible price of my failures. With love, regret, and hope, your mother, Maris Seraphine, lowered the letter to her lap, her emotions too complex to name. Anger, grief, understanding, forgiveness. They swirled together like leaves caught in an autumn wind. Her mother had not abandoned her for money, as she had believed for so long. She had made a terrible mistake, fueled by grief and addiction, a mistake she had spent years regretting. The revelation didn't erase the pain of abandonment, the years of feeling unwanted and discarded, but it shifted something fundamental in Seraphine's understanding of her past. Her mother had loved her, deeply and imperfectly. She had made a devastating choice that hurt them both, a choice born not of callousness, but of brokenness. As the sun began to set over the garden, casting long shadows across the grass, Seraphine felt a weight lifting from her heart, not completely, but enough to allow her to breathe more freely than she had in years. The garden around her, once a place of lost childhood joy, now felt like a space of potential healing, a bridge between past and future. She carefully folded her mother's letter and placed it with her father's. Tomorrow, she would share their contents with Silas and Vera. Tomorrow, she would begin to think about what came next, about how to use the trust fund, about whether to search for her mother. But for now, she simply sat in the gathering twilight, letting the garden embrace her in its familiar arms, feeling, for the first time since childhood, that she was exactly where she belonged. Spring came early to Philadelphia that year. By mid-March, the garden at the Montgomery estate was showing signs of awakening. Crocuses pushing through the soil, buds forming on the trees, the first tentative bird song breaking the winter silence. And like the garden, Seraphine too was undergoing a transformation. 4 months had passed since she had read her parents' letters, 4 months of profound changes, both internal and external. With the trust fund now in her possession, she had left her tiny apartment and rented a charming cottage just 2 blocks from the Montgomery home. She had closed her street flower stand and enrolled in courses at the local community college, studying horticulture and landscape design, passions she had always harbored but never had the means to pursue. But the most significant change was less visible, a gradual healing of old wounds, a cautious opening to new possibilities. She was learning to trust again, to believe that not everyone would eventually abandon her. Much of this was due to the steadfast friendship of Silas and Vera, who had become the family she had longed for all her life. On this particular morning, Seraphine stood in the Whitmore garden, for she had come to think of it by its original name, with a set of architectural plans spread before her on a weathered stone bench. Vera sat beside her, offering occasional comments as they finalized the design. "I think the children's area should be closer to the gazebo," Vera suggested, pointing to the blueprints. "That way, the reading sessions could easily move outside on nice days." Seraphine nodded, making a notation on the plans. "Good idea. And we could add some butterfly-friendly plants around that section. Kids always love watching them." The project they were discussing had begun as a small idea and blossomed into something far more ambitious, transforming part of the Whitmore Garden into a therapeutic space for children in the foster care system. Using a portion of her trust fund, Seraphine had established a foundation dedicated to providing mentorship, educational support, and healing experiences for children who, like her, had been separated from their birth families. "Silas made some calls to his contacts at City Hall," Vera said, checking her notes. "The zoning approval should come through next week, and then we can begin the structural modifications." "I still can't believe you're both so supportive of this," Seraphine said, looking up from the plans. "Letting me essentially take over a third of your garden for this project." Vera smiled, reaching over to squeeze Seraphine's hand. "First of all, it's as much your garden as ours, perhaps more so. And second, this house has always felt too big, too empty for just the two of us. The idea of filling it with children's laughter, with purpose, it feels right." It was true. Over the past months, the Montgomerys had not only embraced Seraphine's foundation, but had become deeply involved in its development. Silas had leveraged his business connections to secure funding and support from corporate sponsors, while Vera had redesigned parts of the house to accommodate office space for the small staff they had begun to assemble. The sound of footsteps on the gravel path made them both look up. Silas was approaching, accompanied by a woman Seraphine didn't recognize, tall and elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. "Sorry to interrupt your planning session," Silas called as they drew near. "But there's someone here I thought you should meet. This is Elena Vasquez, the Director of Child Welfare Services for the city." "Elena, this is Seraphine Whitmore, the founder of the foundation we discussed." Elena stepped forward, extending her hand with a warm smile. "Mr. Montgomery has told me about your vision, Ms. Whitmore. I'm intrigued by your approach to creating healing spaces for children in transition." As Seraphine shook the woman's hand, she felt a flutter of nervousness and pride. Just months ago, she had been a simple flower seller, practically invisible to the world. Now she was discussing policy with city officials, planning programs that could potentially help hundreds of children. "It's based on my own experience," Seraphine explained as they walked through the garden, showing Elena the areas designated for different activities. "I was in the system briefly before being adopted, and then later lived with a family that, while well-intentioned, never quite felt like my own. What I missed most was a sense of rootedness, of connection to something lasting." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "That's precisely what's often overlooked in our current system. We focus on safety and basic needs, as we should. But the emotional and spiritual aspects of healing are harder to address with limited resources." They reached the small pond where, months earlier, Seraphine had fallen to her knees in recognition. Now refurbished, with a new stone pathway around its perimeter, it sparkled in the spring sunshine. "This is where we plan to create a reflection space," Seraphine explained. "A place where children can sit quietly, feed the fish, maybe write in journals or just think. Sometimes the most healing moments come in stillness." As they continued the tour, Discussing logistics and potential partnerships, Seraphine caught glimpses of her own transformation, reflected in Elena's respectful attention, in Silas's proud glances, in Vera's supportive presence. She was no longer defined by abandonment, no longer a person whose story began with loss. She was becoming someone new, someone who could turn her own wounds into sources of healing for others. Later, after Eleanor had departed with promises of support and collaboration, the three of them sat on the terrace overlooking the garden, sharing a bottle of wine as the sun began to set. "To new beginnings," Silas proposed, raising his glass in a toast. "And to finding home," added Vera, her eyes warm with affection. Seraphine lifted her glass, her heart full. "To both, and to the gardens we plant today that will bloom for years to come." As twilight settled over the Whitmore garden, Seraphine felt her father's presence, imagined his pride in seeing how she had found her way back to the place where she had once played as a child. She thought too of her mother, wondered if she was still alive, if she had found peace. The private investigator Silas had hired had uncovered promising leads. Maris Whitmore had apparently settled in a small town in Oregon, had remained sober, had become an art therapist working with trauma survivors. The information sat like a seed in Seraphine's heart, not yet ready to germinate, but full of potential. "Sometimes," she said softly, almost to herself, "the thing we're looking for has been waiting for us all along." Silas and Vera exchanged a glance, understanding the depth behind her simple words. They had all been searching. Seraphine for belonging, the Montgomerys for purpose beyond their comfortable lives. In finding each other, in reclaiming this garden, they had each discovered something essential that had been missing. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Seraphine made a silent promise to herself and to the children who would soon find refuge in this space. The cycles of loss would be transformed into circles of healing, one heart, one garden, one moment of recognition at a time. 1 year later, the Whitmore Garden Healing Center celebrated its grand opening on a perfect June day. The garden, once a private sanctuary, now welcomed dozens of guests, city officials, donors, social workers, and most importantly, the first group of children who would benefit from its programs. Seraphine stood at the entrance, elegant in a simple blue dress that matched the color of the forget-me-nots blooming along the pathways. Beside her, Silas and Vera greeted guests with the quiet pride of people who had helped nurture something meaningful into existence. The transformation of the garden was remarkable. While its essential character remained, the winding stone paths, the century-old trees, the serene pond, new elements had been thoughtfully integrated. A modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows served as the center's main facility, housing classrooms, counseling rooms, and a library filled with books about nature, healing, and self-discovery. Vegetable gardens offered hands-on learning opportunities. Art installations, created by local artists, provided spots for reflection and wonder. "Ms. Whitmore," a small voice drew Seraphine's attention downward. A girl of about 7 stood looking up at her, dark braids framing a serious face. "Is it true that you used to live in this garden when you were little like me?" Seraphine smiled, crouching down to the child's eye level. "I did indeed, right here in the big house. And the garden was my favorite place to play." The girl, Lucia, according to the name tag pinned to her yellow dress, considered this information carefully. "And then you had to go away? Like me from my first home?" A lump formed in Seraphine's throat. "Yes, something like that. I had to leave when I was about your age." "But you came back," Lucia observed. "You found your garden again." "I did," Seraphine agreed. "Sometimes the places and people we love find ways of calling us back to them, even after a very long time." Lucia nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "I'm going to plant sunflowers today," she announced. "My abuela says they always look at the sun, no matter what." "That's a perfect choice," Seraphine said. "Maybe you can show me where you plant them and I can come see them when they bloom." The girl's face lit up. Yes, and I'll take a picture so you won't forget. As Lucia scampered off to join the other children gathering for the planting activity, Seraphine felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Vera watching her, eyes shining with emotion. "You're a natural with them," Vera said softly. "They respond to you because you understand what they're going through in a way most adults can't." Seraphine glanced across the garden, where groups of children were being organized into planting teams. Their faces alight with the simple joy of digging in the earth, of creating something new. They remind me of who I was, who I might have been if things had gone differently. But they also show me who I've become. The morning proceeded with speeches from city officials, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and tours of the facilities. But the heart of the celebration was the children themselves, exploring the garden with wonder, leaving their small marks upon it with plantings and painted stones and fairy houses built from twigs and moss. As the formal part of the event concluded and guests mingled over refreshments, Silas approached Seraphine with a concerned expression. "Are you ready? She's here." Seraphine's heart leapt into her throat. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They had discussed this moment for months, whether to invite her, how to approach the reunion, what expectations to set. In the end, the decision had been Seraphine's alone. Made after long nights of reflection and many conversations with the therapist she had finally allowed herself to see. Silas led her to a quiet corner of the garden, a secluded bench partially hidden by a weeping willow. And there, waiting with hands clasped tightly in her lap, sat an elegant woman in her early 60s, her once dark hair now mostly silver, her face lined with years of emotion. Maris Whitmore looked up as they approached, her eyes, so like Seraphine's own, widening with recognition and fear and hope. "Thank you, Silas," Seraphine said quietly. "I'd like a few minutes alone if that's all right." He squeezed her hand reassuringly and withdrew, leaving mother and daughter face to face for the first time in over 20 years. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply looked at each other, absorbing the changes time had wrought, searching for echoes of the relationship that had been severed so long ago. "Seraphine," Maris finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're so beautiful, so accomplished. I don't have words." Seraphine sat beside her mother, leaving space between them. "I received your letter," she said simply. "It helped me understand, even if it couldn't erase what happened." Maris nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness, just seeing you, knowing you've built this amazing place, that you've found your way back to the garden, it's more than I dared hope for." "I was angry for a long time," Seraphine admitted. "I constructed a version of you in my mind, cold, calculating, choosing money over your child. The reality was more complicated, wasn't it?" "Yes," Maris agreed, her voice steadier now, "but no amount of complexity excuses what I did. I was broken after your father died, but I should have sought help, should have fought harder to keep you. There hasn't been a day since that I haven't regretted my choice." A light breeze stirred the willow branches, creating a gentle rustling that filled the silence between them. In the distance, children's laughter floated through the garden. "I'm not ready to have you in my life completely," Seraphine said finally. "I'm still healing, still understanding who I am, beyond the abandonment that shaped me for so long." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I'd like to get to know who you are now, slowly. Perhaps we could write to each other for a while." Relief and gratitude washed over Maris's face. "I would like that very much." "And Seraphine," she hesitated, then continued with determination, "I want you to know that I'm prepared to go at whatever pace feels right to you. If you decide you need more distance, or if you eventually want more connection, it's your choice. I surrendered my right to expectations long ago." Seraphine nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions, grief for what had been lost, cautious hope for what might still be possible. "The children will be planting a memory garden later today," she said. "Each plant chosen to honor someone important in their lives, present or past. Would you like to stay for that? I would be honored, Maris replied softly. As they rose to rejoin the celebration, Seraphine felt a sense of completion, of cycles turning. The garden that had once been the site of her happiest childhood memories, then the emblem of all she had lost, was now becoming something new, a place of healing not just for her, but for generations of children who needed to find their own sense of belonging. Later, as the day drew to a close and the last guests departed, Seraphine found herself alone in the gazebo where her father had once read her stories. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the garden, illuminating the new plantings, the children's art projects, the pathways that connected past and present. Vera approached, carrying 2 cups of tea. "May I join you?" "Always," Seraphine replied with a smile, making room on the bench. They sat in companionable silence, watching as twilight softened the garden's edges. Finally, Vera spoke. "When Silas and I bought this house, it felt like it was waiting for something. Now I understand. It was waiting for you to come home." Seraphine considered this. "Not just me, I think. It was waiting to become what it is now, a place of healing, of new beginnings. My father would have loved that." "And your mother?" Vera asked gently. "How was it seeing her again?" "Harder than I expected. Easier too, in some ways." Seraphine sipped her tea thoughtfully. "We're both different people now. I don't know if we'll ever have a true mother-daughter relationship, but maybe we can build something new. Sometimes it's what we create for ourselves, the people who help us grow and bloom." "Like you and Silas," Seraphine said softly. "You've been more family to me in this past year than anyone since my father died." Vera's eyes shimmered with emotion. "The feeling is mutual, dear one. You've brought purpose back into our lives when we didn't even realize it was missing." As night fell fully, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky, Silas joined them in the gazebo, settling beside his wife with the comfortable ease of long partnership. "The first children's program starts on Monday," he reminded them. "Are we ready?" Seraphine smiled, her face illuminated by the soft garden lights that had just flickered on along the pathways. "More than ready. The garden is ready too. It knows what to do." Looking out over the transformed space that had once been her childhood playground and was now her life's purpose, Seraphine felt a sense of rightness wash over her. The circle had closed, yet opened at the same time. The little girl who had once played among these flowers had found her way home, bringing with her the wisdom gained through years of loneliness and searching. Now that wisdom would serve as fertile soil for other wounded hearts to plant their hopes, their dreams, their own journeys of healing. In the soft evening air, Seraphine thought she could almost hear her father's voice, carried on the breeze that rustled through the ancient oak trees. "Be brave, be kind, and remember that whenever you stand in a garden, wherever it may be, I am somehow there with you." She had done exactly that. She had found her way back to the garden where it all began, and in doing so, had created a pathway for others to find their way as well. The flowers that would bloom here in seasons to come would be testaments to resilience, to the power of returning, to the possibility that what is broken can not only be mended, but can become something more beautiful for having once been shattered. As the three of them sat together, bound by shared purpose and genuine affection, Seraphine realized that she had finally found what she had been seeking all her life. Not just a physical home, but a place where her heart could rest, where her story made sense, where her pain could be transformed into something that healed rather than hurt. The garden had recognized her that first day, even when she didn't fully recognize herself. And now, fully awake to who she was and who she could become, Seraphine Whitmore was ready to help others find their way back to the places and people who would recognize them too, the places and people who had been waiting all along for their return. My friends, we've come to the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.